So picture this. In the dead of night, on January 3rd, 2026, one of the most daring military operations in recent history goes down in South America. The target? Not a terrorist leader, not a weapons cache, but a sitting head of state. This is the incredible story of how the United States captured the president of Venezuela. And you're going to want to stick around to see why it all comes down to one thing: oil.
So here's the headline, the main event. In a lightning-fast pre-dawn raid, U.S. Special Forces stormed into Caracas, snatched President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, and flew them out of the country. An event like this, it doesn't just make waves, it sends a tsunami across the entire globe.
But how in the world did we get to this point? Well, to really get it, you have to rewind a little. This quote from Donald Trump back in 2023, it's pretty revealing, isn't it? He's talking about oil. And believe me, that one word is absolutely central to this whole story.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. How did this unbelievable operation, codenamed Absolute Resolve, actually happen? Let's break it down.
This whole thing was a masterclass in speed. Just after 2 in the morning, bam, a huge wave of airstrikes hits, knocking out power across the capital. Less than 30 minutes later, you've got elite Delta Force soldiers on the ground. By 3 a.m., they're storming Maduro's compound. And then, get this, in less than 90 minutes from the very first shot, Maduro is in U.S. custody and in the air. Just incredible.
But all that speed, well, it came at a very high price. While the U.S. said they only had 2 soldiers with minor injuries, the story on the ground in Venezuela was a lot different. A senior official there reported that more than 80 people, a mix of civilians and security forces, were killed in the chaos. Look, something this big doesn't just happen out of the blue. This raid was the final explosion after years and years of pressure building up, politically, legally, and economically. So let's trace the steps that led us here. Okay, so the official reason the U.S. gave, it all comes down to this one term: narco-state. For years, the Justice Department has basically been saying that Maduro runs a massive drug cartel called the Cartel of the Suns, apparently named for the sun symbols high-ranking Venezuelan officers wear. By officially labeling Venezuela a state run on drug money, the U.S. built its entire legal case for going in.
And when you look at the timeline, you can literally see the dominoes falling, one by one. First, there's a shady election in 2024 that everyone calls fraudulent. Then, the U.S. officially calls Maduro a terrorist leader. And then, and this is key, the opposition promises to open up the country's oil reserves. Right after that, the U.S. starts seizing Venezuelan oil tankers. Each step just cranked the tension up another notch.
The second Maduro was captured, the world basically split right down the middle. The fallout was immediate, and the reactions, well, they were about as divided as you can possibly get.
You really couldn't have 2 more different stories. The White House is calling it a law enforcement action, like they're just arresting a wanted criminal. Meanwhile, in Caracas, what's left of the government is calling it an illegal kidnapping and flat-out imperialist aggression. It's like 2 separate realities.
And this split went way beyond politics. It was deeply personal. You had protesters in Times Square shouting "No blood for oil," furious at the U.S. action. And at the exact same time, down in Doral, Florida, which has the biggest Venezuelan community in the country, the streets were just one giant party. People were dancing, celebrating, hoping this was the start of a free Venezuela.
And on the world stage? Oh yeah, the lines were drawn in the sand, clear as day. You had the usual suspects like Russia and China condemning it, but also U.S. allies like France. On the other side, countries like Argentina and Germany were praising the move. And then you have Colombia, right next door, just bracing for a potential flood of refugees. A total mess.
Which, of course, brings us full circle, right back to that Trump quote from the beginning. Because underneath all the talk about drugs and democracy, there is this massive, unavoidable economic elephant in the room: oil.
So, when you strip away all the politics, all the justifications from both sides, what's really at stake here? What is the one thing that everyone is really after?
$303 billion. Let that sink in for a second. 303 billion barrels of oil. That is how much Venezuela is sitting on. It's the largest proven reserve on the entire planet, and that number is the real reason we're talking about any of this. And you don't have to look far to see who's ready to cash in. Chevron, they're already there. The only big U.S. player with equipment on the ground ready to go. ConocoPhillips, they're waiting to collect on an almost $9 billion legal claim for assets that were taken from them. Then you have the service companies like SLB and Baker Hughes, who are just salivating at the chance to rebuild the country's entire oil industry from the ground up.
And finally, refiners like Valero, whose Gulf Coast facilities are perfectly designed for Venezuelan crude. The amount of money on the table is just staggering.
This quote from an energy expert at Columbia really nails it. It basically says that the rest of the world is going to look at this and see a new American foreign policy, one that is way more aggressive, way more greedy, and way more focused on just taking what it wants for itself.
So, that's the big question we're all left with, right? Was this a noble war on drugs to take down a dictator? Or was it a calculated, modern-day resource grab for the biggest pile of oil in the world? We don't know the answer yet. But as this brand new, really uncertain chapter begins for Venezuela, you can bet the entire world is watching to see who ends up in control.